Alexandra Midal is a writer, an independent curator, film director, and professor ordinaire at the Geneva University of Art and Design, HED, so our second guest from this school today. She also serves as the director of theory at the French National Institute for Advanced Studies in Industrial Design in Paris. Her research explores the construction of design and intermediality, with a particular focus on the gray and obscure areas within these fields. So this actually nicely ties up to the opening after this talk. She's a fantastic thinker and a brilliant writer, and she's also the curator of the 28th edition of the Biennial of Design, BIO, which is titled Double Agent. Which is titled Double Agent, Do You Speak Flower? And which will open on November 21st at the Museum of Architecture and Design in Ljubljana. This lecture has also been organized in collaboration with the Museum of Architecture and Design. In her lecture today, Alexandra will talk about floriography, or the feminist tradition of encrypted messages hidden within flowers, and also about murder as a design hobby. Please welcome Alexandra Midal.
Thank you. Oh, yeah. Good evening. Thank you for introducing me. I'm really thrilled to be part of the Indigo Festival. I was here last year. I attended in the room, and now I'm on the other side. It's quite impressive. So let me jump directly into what brings me here. I was invited to present you the next BIO Design Biennale opening in next late November. But I decided to wander first to give you a context, a background of this new edition. Therefore, I need to go back to the construction of design history very quickly. In the foreword to his 1948 book, Mechanization Takes Command, historian Siegfried Giedion explains the rationale behind his encyclopedic work on American mechanization, the study of which, he writes, is dictated by the importance of paying attention to humble things. Things not usually granted earnest consideration, or at least not value for their historical import. He justified the need to pay attention to little things, to details, and the seemingly insignificant by noting that, I quote, the sun is mirrored even in a coffee spoon. Although crime acts as counterpoint debarred from official design history, it actually illustrates an individual ingenuity that overflows the criteria of morality and could, for that reason, lay claim to the prominent position within design history. Ever since, I wanted to show you a second image. Ever since the utopian News from Nowhere by William Morris, in which the designer devoted a chapter to crime, designers have been appropriating fiction and more seldom crime, yes, to project forward the political and social criticism inherent in their discipline. Steeped in the virtuous issues informing their respective disciplines in the modern era, critics of architecture and design historians have refused to show any interest in criminal subjects, even though the famous crime scene scattered with traces and clues is the scene for starting investigation. Indeed, as philosopher Walter Benjamin claimed, to dwell means to leave traces, and the traces of the inhabitant are imprinted in the interior. I would like to invite you, in a way, in an introduction to the design exhibition, as if you would enter as a detective, as if you would enter a detective story, looking for clues. Edgar Allan Poe, in his philosophy of furniture, as well as in his detective novels, has presented himself as the first physiognomist of the domestic interior. On this question he wrote, the criminals in early detective novels are neither gentlemen nor apaches, but private citizens of the middle class. Oops. Walter Benjamin, him again, has connected outward responsibility with criminals and private persons and bourgeois, who both scatter clues within rooms and interiors. This is why today, in order to tease BIO 28 Design Biennale, I would like to introduce the question of space, crime, and investigation. I will therefore give some background with a double portrait. On one side, the worm-like large-scale dwelling of H.H. Holmes, considered the first serial killer in the United States. And on the other, sorry, I went a little bit too quickly. Frances Glessner Lee, that you see here, that invented a series of nutshells in order to show how to consider a crime scene and invented the forensic sciences. I think there is, yeah. Comparing these two case studies invites to re-examine the importance of deciphering these traces and secrets. To portray them, of course, they might not look like designers, person who envision crime as an art, such as the Society of Connoisseurs in Murder, described by Thomas de Quincey in his famous book on murder, considered as one of the fine arts, raises questions about the nature of the relationship between architecture, design, home sweet home, and crime. This intersection deconstructs the idea of an interiority governed by the moral idea of an angel of the house, advocated by poet Coventry Patmore, as a chaste individual, a woman, of course, who unconditionally supports her husband's wishes. Traversed by the hostile uncanniness notion established by Sigmund Freud and revisited by the architectural historian Anthony Vidler, and far from John Ruskin's Victorian idea, the angel and her nest house is triggering the functionalist normalization of modern architecture and its numerous criteria of standardization. Let's compare H.H. Holmes' Murder Castle, as it was called, and part of a capitalist merge today, providing a sense of thrills and chills, may it be a jigsaw puzzle, a video game, a rock song, guided tour of the vanished site. Murder Castle has been replaced by a post office, but still is visited, or an escape room in Bordeaux, France. Built between 1886 and 1893 in Chicago in order to comfortably house its crimes, the vast three-story building that you can see here on the image, known as the Holmes Castle, was an immense structure of 15 by 38 meters, not to include the basement. It was designed entirely by the owner, H.H. Holmes, but no plans were ever communicated to the workers who built it. And for these homes, had a good reason. The horrid use of some of the 35 or so rooms per floor had to be kept secret. It was really designed entirely by him, and it's very different than my second case study that you can see here. It brings together 20 models of crime scenes realized by Glessner Lee in the 1940s. They are described in many novels, photographed by newspapers, and published in color in magazines such as Life magazine or the pulp mag Popular Mechanics. These dollhouses / dioramas were long forgotten before to be rediscovered, restored, and exhibited in 2017-2018 at the Renwick Gallery of the Smithsonian American Art Museum. To compare briefly these two case studies and their authors, Frances Glessner Lee, whose concern was to educate the police and police officers with the devil, H.H. Holmes, as he calls himself, in his pseudo-confessions, raises an ambiguity that stressed the importance of examining crime from the point of view of design and architecture, instead of the usual moral standpoint. We know how vital is the role played by the examination of material in investigations. However, at the turn of the 20th century, police officers in the United States were constantly obscuring the crime scenes, and their unnecessarily complicated the work of forensic investigation. It was to this huge challenge that Glessner Lee dedicated her efforts, time, and lots of money. In 1943, at the age of 65, she gave up the latest handiwork expected of a woman of her social class and devoted herself to the art of producing nutshell crime scenes. She produced 20 dioramas, mostly depicting working-class interiors, taking into account the recommendation of her dear friend George Burgess McGrath, professor of pathology at Harvard Medical School and chief medical examiner for Suffolk County, whom she had met in 1898 and who, in the early 1930s, invited her to attend his autopsies at the North Grove Street mortuary in Boston. She realized that it was time to launch a revolution in the forensic science. Glessner-Lee created scenes measuring approximately 30 by 82 by 83 centimeters. They were used to educate police officers back home at the Rocks, ruminating on the recommendation in the coroner and medical examiner report and on everything she has learned from McGrath. Glessner-Lee identified 3 areas that require development in order for American society truly to embrace modernity in its investigation of unexpected death. Medicine, the law, and the police all desperately needed reform in order to establish a functional discipline of legal medicine. A crime scene shows scenes of strangulation, evisceration, poisoning, hanging, etc., painstakingly constructed by her only. There interweave several different miscellaneous events related to her by police officers. Using the data thus collected, she created interiors littered with corpses. On tile floors or patterned carpets surrounded by walls covered in wallpaper, among toys, furniture, overturned shoes, and bottles of alcohol all over the place. I don't know if there were any kind of orange wine. They sit next to tables covered with dollies, china plates, jars of food, newspaper, and sideboards, proudly displaying wedding photographs. Here we see a model of ties, a phonograph, a bathtub, an overturned chair. Over there, a rocking horse, a child in a high chair, a cradle, and so on. And these realistic interiors are blotched with fingerprints, stains, and pools of blood made with nail varnish. Nothing that Glessner-Lee imagined for a crime scene could be purchased in the form she wanted from shops. That was impossible. So she had to design all the settings and objects, the air, the fingers, the skin of her characters by herself. I'm not representing the finest pieces, not period pieces, but I'm trying to show the typical furnishing in lower middle-class homes or in poverty-stricken shacks or tenements, she said. Mostly, she goes on, the furniture of that nondescript type which one cannot imagine as even having been procurable at any place but a second-hand store. The extreme attention to detail with which Glessner-Lee executed the ensemble endowed her teaching with the realism needed, the idea being to convey precious information. The house as a scene of the crime. After several years of feverish preparation, you might know that the Chicago World's Fair or the World's Columbian Exhibition, which ushered in Western actual modernity, was inaugurated on May 1st, 1893, and went on to welcome 150,000 visitors a day. That's all we wish for Bio. Among the people thronging into this temple of the most advanced knowledge, technology, and know-how was the young Frances Glessner and her family. In June 1893, Fanny, as she was called, 15 years old at the time, rode the Ferris wheel with the 2 Georges at the World's Columbian Exhibition, the first World's Fair to be held in Chicago. Situated on 1690 acres of the South Side waterfront, the fair was an opportunity to display the city's recovery from the Great Fire of 1871. The Glessners visited the exposition several times. Taking advantage of the national enthusiasm for this international event, Holmes, who'd been living in the White City for several years, planned to play his part in the celebrations by revolutionizing the art of homicide. In 1893, preparing for the flux of visitors, he added an extra floor to his building just a stone's throw from the fair and opened the World's Fair Hotel in a blaze of publicity. This addition, designed to accommodate passing tourists whom he would then rob and kill, was the crowning achievement of his architectural concept of combining comfort with crime. The police simply overlooked this smart businessman and charming, as he was said, ladies' man. One name missing from the rogues gallery was indeed H. Holmes, a physician, an entrepreneur, a devious liar, a skilled swindler, wrote later a police officer. Meanwhile, Holmes was active as a pharmacist, inventor, and entrepreneur. He excelled at appropriating the innovation proposed to him in his patent shop on the ground floor of his castle. Once these innovations had been implemented, and sometimes, but not always, improved, he used them to efficiently slaughter his victims in various rooms of his building designed for that very purpose, in order to steal their possessions. That being his main motive, money. It's hard to give an exact number. In his confessions, Holmes admitted to murdering 27 people, mostly women. Hyperbolically, the popular press put the number of over 200. What fascinated about this crime was his modus operandi, which illustrates the functionalist and technological side of Industrial Revolution, standardization, seriality, serial killing that operated within design and architecture. In the rational execution of his victims and the path he followed, Holmes demonstrated an unprecedented understanding of the technophilia of his time, the industrial capitalism of the second half of the 19th century, making him an irresistible subject for the press. Witness the delight of the journalists who bought and published 3 versions of his confessions that he wrote before he was hanged on the gallows in the prison yard. Assuming they are true, it would appear that Holmes perpetrated his crimes almost exclusively in the buildings he had put up for that purpose. A giant of a structure which facades punctuated by irregular geometric half hexagons and rounded turrets, the castle housed flats and shops, a patent office, the famous pharmacy, a restaurant, a jeweler's, etc. All shelter under strip fabric canopies, full of narrow passageways, hidden staircases, secret doors, and rooms, corridors, and trapdoors. The building concealed myriad inventions to facilitate its owner's lethal business. Rooms lined with asbestos to prevent the spread of fire, rooms with no windows or other openings, totally soundproofed spaces, dumb waiters, remotely controlled gas, electric panels for monitoring guest movement, rooms that could be emptied of air, crematorium, fast of quicklime, dissection table, labyrinth, secret passages, etc., etc., all serving a multiple killer in slippers, if I may do that. Kind of make up this expression. Oops. The prophetic relationship between Holmes and his labyrinthine castle becomes clear when pursued by the detective of the Pinkerton Agency for swindling life insurance companies and forced to flee Chicago to other cities. The murderer made plans to relocate his activities by building an exact replica of his castle elsewhere. Diametrically opposed to the castle in terms of size and purpose, Glessner Lee's dioramas subvert the childlike connotation of the Victorian doll's house. The use of these miniatures, which were supposed to instill in modern girls the virtues of obedience and the joy of domesticity, diverted the apparent innocence associated with them by inserting macabre and squalid events. However, just as the castle contains so much evidence that as soon as Holmes was incarcerated, it suffered several mysterious explosions designed to make the incriminating trace of his macabre activity disappear, Glessner Lee agreed that the dwelling is the site by excellence for the evidence of crime. Above all, the intersecting path of Glessner Lee and Holmes reveal a very striking ambiguity. Although not trained designers, criminologists, or architects, each in their own way fulfilled the mission of these professions, but did so by twisting their tradition. Holmes anticipated the possibility of domestic innovation such as gas, electricity, a kiln that could produce sheets of glass the size of an individual, and so on. For her part, Glessner-Lee turned the innocent doll's house, an instrument of gender normative education, into a nest for the murders she imagined. Together, these two practices, miniature versus immense, craft versus industrialization, fiction versus reality, good versus evil, demonstrate that the mechanics of crime have every right to write design history. Space reveals its secrets and moves away from the classic notion of the interior, which Walter Benjamin once described as the den and the case, positing it as man's only refuge from the danger associated with the modern city, replacing it with the importance of a narrative accounting for the traces left behind its occupants. Perhaps the most interesting aspect of this idea lies in the power of the narrative to titillate our inclination to slip into the clothes of a Sunday, or I don't know if you say that as a Sunday, but as a kind of amateur Sherlock Holmes. Holmes and H.H. Holmes have nothing in common, and tackle the investigation, however little we know about criminology. Rarely associated with criminal cases, this dark side questions the evocative power of the narrative, an aspect of design that is at stake in the next BO Biennale entitled Double Agent. Do you speak flower? And I'm very happy to show some of the image realized by the graphic designer of the project, Rafaela Dracic. Do not take it too literally, please. BO is not, I'm sorry if you are disappointed, BO is not about murder and crime, no. But it says upon narrative arcs that are more commonly associated with evil and treachery than the good design, such as the collection of rooms in which murder have been committed, assembled by architect Mark Lamphere in psychoanalytic Fritz Lang film, The Secret Behind the Door in 1947. However, as historian Mark Selzer points out, while fears and desires blur the distinction between fiction and real events, I quote, true crime is crime fact that looks like crime fiction, end of quotes. Exploring the narrative force of forensic investigation for an exhibition is, I believe, a good perspective. It is no coincidence, thus, that criminology can sometimes claim, that will be the visitors probably, with a magnifying glass. So it's not coincidence thus that criminology can sometimes claim to be the model and the metaphor for the art amateur in search of clues that will enable them to decipher artworks that seem silent or mysterious, or even more precisely, for the exhibition curator who used narrative and a suspense and revelation to construct the itinerary of an exhibition. As I said, these questions are fuel next BO 28 Biennale that invite visitors to become detectives and to try, and maybe succeed, to decipher the intermedial feminist struggles with encrypted messages hidden within flowers. Double Agent, Do You Speak Flower? Explores the intersection of flower and steganography. Steganography describes the practice of concealing secret information within an image, an object, a message, to avoid detection. From a technical point of view, steganography has the particularity of being invisible, unlike cryptography, which consists of encrypting information in order to conceal it and therefore points to the existence of a message to be decrypted. More simply, cryptography hides the meaning, whereas steganography hides the existence of the secret. Diabolic by essence, this Biennale explores the practice of secrecy, examined through a manipulative and untruthful language. practices long condemned by the tenets of the modern movement in search of moral approval and moral sake. Here, on the contrary, the challenge is to take a step to the side and assert the strategic, beneficial, and vital importance of simulacra, ruse, and treachery. Double legend, you speak flowers does not concentrate on any one artistic discipline, field, or genre, and rejects whole hierarchies between disciplines. Rather, it moves back and forth across history to reveal an abundance of steganographies and their topicality in such troubled time as ours. This exhibition is itself political inasmuch as it examines the practice of secrecy in light of a language that overtly uses manipulation and lies. Practices, as I said, long condemned. And it goes to the vital importance of visual simulacra. This exhibition is an opportunity to investigate within the floral metaphors and its codification. They have embodied multiple significations, such as the emergence of the psychology and its social implication, the gallantry, for instance, of Madame Charlotte de la Tour's floriography Langage des Fleurs, and many others floriographies, the pairing of floral motifs with sexual organs, those of writers like Oscar Wilde adorning his buttonhole with a green carnation, or British lesbians adorning themselves with violet flowers, both signifying homosexuality at a time where it could cause you jail or even worse. All the while erecting the principle of a Christian morality. At the same time, the idea of a passive woman-flower association has colonized the arts, the literature, and poetry, assigned as a sexually pure object, desirable because passive. The woman has often been represented surrounded by bouquets of flowers in her home or in the middle of a flower garden, symbolizing a place in the world. Among others, I will show that the association of women ornaments, specifically in the analogy of the woman flower, might be extremely beautiful and delicate, but has prompted astonishing works of camouflage. Far from being mute, as sociologists of micrology, Siegfried Krakauer argue, mundane detail, and I add such as floral ornaments, have gained in scope, cunning, and polysemy throughout the 20th century, particularly since the emergence of Art Nouveau. I'm really sorry because usually I use Keynote and here I change to PowerPoint, and that's why I have to do back and forth with the image. Usually it doesn't go like that. So thank you for your patience, and I hope you don't have sea sickness. In the wake of the first industrial revolution in the 1951 London World's Fair criticism, the first debate on the influence of flowers on individuals began. It was associated with the idea that self-expression, or the manifestation of the personality, dialogues with objects and things in parallel with consideration on the permeability of the modern subject. While lines, color, and swirling shapes were credited with stimulating a suggestive power leading to self-discovery, psychological interiority and nervous vibration came to the fore. The initiator of the modern aesthetic, the flower woman, embodies the eternal feminine in Alphonse Mucha. Goes too quickly. In Alphonse Mucha's season, the one that you can see, as much, I hope it's going to arrive. No, it does not. Sorry. So, as much as, for instance, in Loy Fuller's Lily Dance, and this comparison invites a redefinition of woman as she was called a hothouse flower, an essentially ravishing sensual creature that supported the ideal of the vulnerable and submissive woman. At the same time, the Woman Flower Association proliferated in the arts, literature, and poetry. Confined to the status of a sexually pure and passive, and hence desirable object, women were depicted surrounded by bouquets of flowers in their homes or in flower gardens, symbolizing their place in the world. But over the flower woman in Proust's À l'ombre des jeunes filles en fleurs, within a budding grove, and the Cattleyas in Swanways, a name for a type of orchid on one way, but also the code word for lovemaking used by Swann and Odette in the novel, looms the threat of a wilting. In the same time, French poet Pierre de Ronsard, in his ode Mignonne, allons voir si la rose était close, spins a vegetal metaphor comparing the 14-year-old Cassandre to a morning rose and asking her to give in to his desires of an old poet before she withers. This context enables a better understanding of the relationship between woman and flower, which has been a topic of interest for countless historians. Poring over the 3070 herbarium pages in Rosa Luxemburg, 17 blue-covered notebooks, for instance, they noted the inclination for botany of the famous revolutionary who first studied zoology before submitting a thesis in political science on the industry. That was the topic. I couldn't find it. I would be very eager to read it. So the title was The Industrial Development of Poland at the University, the Industrial Development of Poland, and it was defended at the University of Zurich in 1897. Her passion was so consuming that her first herbariums were continually enriched, even during her years in jail. Indeed, the anti-militarist was repeatedly accused of incitement to sedition, and she was imprisoned on various occasions between 1915 and 1918, and you probably know that she was assassinated in 1919, just after she was released from jail. And during this time, she compiled 7 more notebooks. Her herbariums of flowers collected in the Sudetenland, the Alps, in the courtyard of the nursery of the prisons, and to have thought and presented and examined as being a life-saving distraction for the lady prisoner, whose daily life was punctuated, it was said, by bouts of depression. The trope of the flower woman in Victorian literature and art was at odds with the appearance of the new woman. This figure, alternatively envisioned as a gargantuan Amazon or an emaciated, frock-coated Homesse, was deeply unsettling, not least because she inverted traditional sexual roles and threatened the essential divisions ordering bourgeois life: public from private, work from family, production from reproduction. This attitude is very well summarized in an article by Ray Beth Gordon's sharp observation, where she explains the femme tapisserie, which is like tapestry woman, and femme cafetière, coffee machine woman, that will become the flower woman of Art Nouveau. End of quotes. Woman is a commodity in that sense and an object of conception, the subject of a process of commodification, in which Annette Stoll distinguished 2 aspects. On the one hand, the flower woman is the conservative response to velleities of emancipation, that is, to the new woman of the 1890s, the flapper of the 1920s, here, and all their liberal sisters in between. On the other hand, this metaphor equates women with passive elegance, when in fact they are boldly attacking the bastions of art and design held by men. The concept of new psychology was coined as early as the 1890s by Jean-Martin Charcot, the star doctor who condemned so-called hysterical women to internment at the Salpêtrière, and by Hippolyte Bernheim, who opposed Charcot by arguing that the torrential flow of external perception and inner thought are constantly reconfiguring each other. The floral meanderings of decoration replace geometric motifs in a movement that echoes the upheavals associated with the discovery of the unconscious. From this angle, floral abundance offers a unique opportunity to reveal the nervous tensions, and influenced by Dr. Alexandra Axelfeld Traité des Névroses from 1883, the various pathology of city life and theories of suggestions are supposed to be triggered by curvilinear, swirling objects and decorative motifs. They are everywhere, from the private space of the spirit room in the Biennale to Loy Fuller's floral dance. They elicit states disconnected from reason, and they enable us to communicate with other worlds. This is a new piece by Tony Osler. All these tricks forms the intelligence that media philosopher Wilhelm Flusser has described as, I quote, the founding design of all culture, of all civilization, end of quote. Considering the designer to be, and I quote him again, a perfidious schemer who lays traps, and which is equally addressed to the artists, to the filmmakers and architects in this exhibition, validating cunning, deception, and perfidy in this way, like Morse code and other cryptology, steganographies, and glossolalia that belong to the field of intelligence studies, this academic world of intelligence, is part of the moral art described by Torquato Aceto in De la dissimulazione onesta, under cover of the stereotypes of gallantry and a metaphor of the eternal feminine. Flowers are skillful spies. The abundance of flowers in double-edged geospic flower dynamize the cliché of the flower woman to underline the strategies, the artifice, and the cunning that offer operative stratagems of resistance at the core of design. Seen as hypnotic spectacle, the technological innovation and the metaphor of the flower woman extend to the popular iconography of photographer Stéphane Laurent in his satirical magazine Lilliput, where he invented the juxtaposition of heterogeneous visuals. On a double-page spread, this one, two photographs face each other. On the left is our Lily, that's the name, a woman in a flared white dress, performing an acrobatic feat by lifting herself off the ground on one arm, a 1937 photograph by Dr. Krohn. And on the right, you can see the harem Lily, a turgid lily by Felix Mann. This reduction of the female body to an explicitly sexual morphological metaphor echoes the genital reading of Georgia O'Keeffe painting. This Freudian perception, initiated in 1919 by her companion of the time, Alfred Stieglitz, has become an authority. It was constantly revived by art critics, despite the artist's denials, for almost 60 years, until it was revived in the 1970s by feminists such as Judy Chicago. Whether psychoanalytic denial or clever concealment of an erotism otherwise censored by British America, no credence has been given to O'Keeffe's words, thus dispossessing her of the meaning of her work. Female and male critics alike have shown their blatant misogyny, regarding the artist as either a poor liar or an innocent, incapable of understanding her inner workings of her psyche, of her work. The exhibition, therefore, questions the meaning within the raison d'être of forms in general, as well as their metamorphoses and secret meanings, whatever they are originally supposed to embody: allegory, metaphor, alienation, reification. Each of their occurrence offers the possibility of semantic renewal. These palimpsest effects take a political turn in Double Agent, which reinvents the aesthetic trivialization of floral variations to better decipher what they are all about. Between surface and mystification, Double Agent geospic flower will demonstrate that the manipulation of form is as important as ever when it comes to start and continue important battles. You will be welcomed by one of these flower sculptures that will talk to you at the entrance. This exhibition questions the meaning within the raison d'être of a form and forms in general, as well as their metamorphoses. That's really the major point, in fact, that we will see. And to bounce back again to the idea of the investigation that structured the exhibition, if the visitor really is interested enough to discover what are the content and secret messages dissimulated behind the various film, experimental films, film of cinema industry, painting, furniture, photography, illustration, books, graphic design, etc., they can unveil and decipher the hidden meanings within flowers that are only revealed to you now a little bit and in a final twist in the exhibition. But of course, I will not reveal any of this secret message to you today. And I did not, on purpose, as you are very warmly invited to visit the Biennale very soon. So, thank you.
Alexandra, thank you. I have a first question, if I may, before you also think of something. So it is a biennale of, it was a biennale of industrial design, then became a biennial of design. But how many designers and other practitioners are they most probably going to be at the exhibition? If you can reveal that. Roughly.
I think there's about like more than 120 works, and I didn't count the number of participants so far. Sorry, that I don't know. Yeah, it's true. The history of Bio, which is the most ancient design biennale in Europe, was industrial design, but it has changed for several editions. And in fact, that's what tempted me to agree on participating to this biennale. It's because it's one of the most bold and audacious biennale in the world about design. Most of the time, biennale are dealing with what you can find in a store. The most important event in furniture design is Salone del Mobile. And Salone del Mobile, even if there are events outside, is mostly about business. I don't think that's what a biennale in a museum for the visitor should do. And that's why this biennale is not really dealing entirely on furniture design, industrial design, especially that, if I may say, do we really need more industrial design? And that's a real question mark in a world that is suffering from lots of problems. And the industry and the production and the construction, is it that necessary in the way that we are doing it today? There are some designers, for instance, who come to the Biennale and do and produce projects such as Nathalie Crasset, who kind of gave up. Even if she was super successful, this idea that design should be about industrial design. And the other thing that is really important, and I know that there is someone here who would believe the same thing that I'm going to say, is that design is an intermediate discipline. And design was born not by the usual modernist story written by Pevsner in 1936 with his very famous Pioneers of Modern Movement. That was very much influenced by the idea to help modern movement in architecture. But from my point of view, and that's why I wrote about, it was coming from women in the 1850s in the US who tried to change entirely the organization of the home in order to explain and express in the reality how it was time to end slavery. So right away, from the beginning, the question of design is a political issue. And I think there is a whole story, and I'm not the only one to think like that, that will first claim that design, as many faces, is a place of debate, is a place of contradiction, is a place also that is intermediate in the game that it is playing with other medium than the production of objects. It's way more interesting than what we usually think that design is. And this Biennale, like some of them before, are showing that. I mean, you have the right not to like it. But it's good to debate. We're in a world where we do not debate very much, don't you agree? I think it's good. It's a proposal. It's not a final point. It's not a conclusion.
And that's the twist?
Oh, no. You
Okay.
really want to know? You still have 2 months to wait.
Okay.
But there is one room called Hidden in Plain Sight, which is really the time of the twist, like in a thriller.
Any questions? In which case, I can only say thank you again for coming. Thank you for your preparation. Thank you for your work. Thank you for the Biennale. And I hope we will meet and we all meet again in November at the Mall.
The only thing and the last thing I can say is first really thank you. I was really happy to be here. And believe me, when you will come to see this show, you will never see flowers like you did before.